Hey Math Aces, and welcome to Mr. Ace Math. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to add unlike fractions. And in case you don't know, unlike fractions are just fractions where the bottom or the denominator is not the same. And let's start, as always, with the lesson breakdown. And in case you don't know, or in case you're new here, in the description below, you'll find this exact lesson breakdown with timestamps to each part of the lesson. And you can use those timestamps to go to any part of the video that you really need help with. First, we're going to talk about why denominators are so important. After that, we'll talk about least common denominator, and then go over step by step how to add unlike fractions. We'll go over our first example, which is a model, and then we'll have two more examples that we go over step by step how to add unlike fractions. After that, you'll have the pause and practice. This is where you get the chance to try out your skills that you learn from these examples. After that, the answers will be revealed, followed by the reflection. A lot of students struggle with adding unlike fractions, and that's really because there's a lot of skills you need before you can even do this. So please make sure you have these before you start this lesson. Number one, make sure you know what fractions are, that the top is called the numerator and the bottom is called the denominator. Make sure you know how to create equivalent fractions using multiplication, and make sure you know what least common multiple or LCM is. Also make sure you're comfortable with mixed numbers, improper fractions, how to reduce fractions into simplest form, and how to convert improper fractions into mixed numbers. Now that we know what's needed, let's get started. So I want to start this lesson off by talking about something that a lot of teachers don't really go into great detail about. And that is, why exactly is the denominator so important when it comes to adding unlike fractions, or fractions with different denominators? Well, there are two reasons for why that is. The first reason is because the denominator tells you the number of pieces in one whole, but it also tells you the size of each piece. Let's say, for example, we have the fraction 1/2. Right now, the whole thing is shaded. 1/2 means that out of the two, we only need one. So we can get rid of one of those pieces. Then let's say we have 1/4. This is one whole. Out of 4 total pieces, we're only talking about 1. So let's get rid of the rest of it. So now we have 1/2 and 1/4. If we try to add or put them together, you'll notice that we don't have a clear answer. And the reason why that is because in order to add fractions, the pieces must be the same sizes. And in order to do that, we have to make the denominators the same. Because when we make the denominators the same, our pieces will be the same size, and then we can add them. Well, how do we do that? We have to find something called the least common denominator. And like I said earlier in the needed skills, you're going to need to know about least common multiple. And all the LCD is it's the least common multiple for the denominators you're talking about. For example, let's say we have the fractions 1/2 and 1/4. Well, here the denominator is 2, and here the denominator is 4. What is the least common multiple for 2 and 4? Well, that would be 4. Since the least common multiple of 2 and 4 is 4, that means that LCD, the least common denominator for these two fractions, is 4. Let's do two more quick examples. Let's say we have the fractions 3/5 and 2/7. In this fraction, what's the denominator? Well, that's 5. And in this fraction, what's the denominator? Well, that's 7. And what the least common multiple for 5 and 7? That would be 35, which means that the LCD for these two fractions would be 35. And here's our last example of LCD. Let's say we have the fractions 2/3 and 1/9. Well, in this fraction, the denominator is 3. And in this fraction, the denominator is 9. So what is the least common multiple of 3 and 9? Because that would give us our LCD. Well, the least common multiple for 3 and 9 is 9. Since those are our denominators, that means that our least common denominator, or LCD, equals 9. Now that we're comfortable with LCD, we can go into the step-by-step process for how to add unlike fractions. And the reason why we couldn't do that right away is because LCD is a really important part. So here are the 3 steps. Step number 1, find the LCD. Step number 2, use that LCD to create equivalent fractions. And step number 3, add the numerators. And I just want to say this again. The reason why this process is so important is because when we do this, we're creating fractions where the pieces are all the same size. Having said that, let's go back to our original model. So remember, we had 1/2 plus 1/4. The very first step is to find the LCD. So we're looking at our denominators, 2 and 4. And what is the least common denominator for 2 and 4? That would be 4. Now that we know that the LCD is 4, we go to step 2. And step 2 was to use the LCD to create equivalent fractions. So basically, we're turning this 1/2 into a fraction that has a 4 in the denominator. And what can we multiply 2 by to get 4? Well, that would be times 2. And since we're multiplying the bottom of the fraction by 2, we'll do the same thing to the top of the fraction. That means we're going to have 1 times 2. And that equals 2. Take a look at what happens to 1/2 here in the model. Because we are taking it and multiplying it by 2, we've turned our halves into fourths. So the 2 halves in our model here will now be turned fourths. Because now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. And of those fourths, how many are shaded? That's 2. So we've got 2 fourths. And nothing changed for the 1/4 here. This is going to stay fourths. And the only way to show that using multiplication is by multiplying by 1. So we're multiplying the bottom by 1. And whatever we do to the bottom of the fraction, we do to the top. So we're going to have 1 times 1, which equals 1. So our model won't change at all. So now that we've done step 2, by creating equivalent fractions, we can go to step 3, which is to add our fractions. And since the denominators are the same now, all we have to do is add the numerators. And what's 2 plus 1? Well, that's 3. So our answer here is 3/4. And take a look at our model. We're going to take these 2/4 and bring it down next to this 1/4, making the 3/4 that we got for our answer. So let's go to our next example. And the first thing to do is line them up, one on top of the other. And remember, there are 3 steps. Step 1 is to find the LCD. So what's the LCD of 8 and 3? Well, that's 24. Step 2 is to use that LCD to create equivalent fractions. Let's start with 3/8. 8 times what is 24? Well, that's 8 times 3. And since we multiplied the bottom by 3, we'll multiply the top by 3. And 3 times 3 equals 9. So our new equivalent fraction is 9/24. For 2/3, 3 times what is 24? That's 8. So we'll do the same thing to the top. 2 times 8 equals 16. We now have fractions with the same denominator, which means we can go to step number 3, which is to add the numerators. So we've got 9 plus 16, and that equals 25. So our answer is 25 over 24. But we have a problem. The issue is that's an improper fraction, and we can't leave our answer like that. So we convert it to a mixed number by dividing 25 by 24. That goes in one whole time with the remainder of 1. And that means our final answer is 1 and 1 over 24. So here's our last example. 1/5 plus 4/9. Step 1 is to find the LCD, but before we even do that, we should always make sure we write our fractions one on top of the other. So now we have to find the LCD for 5 and 9. When we do that, that is 45. Now we can go to step 2. We use the LCD to create equivalent fractions. 5 times what is 45? Well, that would be 9. Since we multiplied the bottom by 9, we're going to multiply the top of the fraction by 9. And when we do that, we do 1 times 9, which equals 9. Now let's look at the bottom fraction. 9 times what is 45? Well, that's 5. And since we multiplied the denominator by 5, we'll multiply the numerator by 5 as well. So we've got 4 times 5, and that equals 20. Now that we've got our equivalent fractions, we can go to step 3, which is just to add the numerators. So we've got 9 plus 20, and that gives us 29. And the denominator will just stay the same. So our final answer is 29 over 45. So here's your pause and practice. Just pause and practice. Hit the pause button and try these questions. When you're done, hit the play button to see if your answers are correct. Ready, set, go. So let's take a look at our answers. Number 1 is 7 over 9. Number 2 is 26 over 35. Number 3 is 1 and 5 over 9. Number 4 is 23 over 24. Number 5 is 1 and 7 over 22. And number 6 is 1 and 13 over 28. So how'd you do, Math Aces? If you got everything right, I want you to put Pause and Practice Pro in the comments. And don't forget to share this with a friend. So what did we learn today? Fractions with different denominators are called unlike fractions. Denominators are important because they tell you the number of pieces in one whole and the size of each piece. The least common denominator, or the LCD, is the lowest common multiple of two or more denominators. There are blank steps to adding unlike fractions. Well, there are 3 steps. The 3 steps are: 1. Find the LCD. 2. Use that LCD to create equivalent fractions. And 3. To add the numerators. So there you have it, Math Aces. Everything you'll need to know about how to add unlike fractions. I hope this helps, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'd love to help. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in math class.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Questions? Comments? Leave them down below.
And thanks for using Mr. Ace Math. Don't just pass math, ace it.